Hello, everybody. This is Fun Police, and I am back with something that is new to this channel. I'm bringing you a Steel Division 2 deck overview. Steel Division 2 has been a game that I've been playing for just a couple months now, and although I'm definitely not very good at the game, at least right now, I've had a lot of fun with it, and I really have enjoyed the various deck building. Recently, the game came out with a new DLC, the Tribute to Italy, which brought about 8 new divisions, and I've really enjoyed them. And namely, the 26 Panzer has quickly become kind of one of my favorite divisions in the entire game. And I've just really had a lot of fun with it, and I wanted to share it with you guys. Uh, if you like this content and want to see more of it, definitely make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also leave a comment down below. Just tell me you like it, or maybe suggest another division, that maybe I could try to build and give a video overview of. Or even if you just play Steel Division 2 yourself, I'm curious to know how many people that watch me actually do play this. But regardless, for today, we're going to get into the overview quite quickly, and we'll just quickly go over everything. To start out, this is a balanced deployment type, meaning that we're willing to take the game into a longer match. We could. I do think it is entirely possible to do something like Vanguard or Maverick also. But I think balanced works very well because we have the ability to bring some pretty potent armored units and do have a pretty well-rounded roster that can help us take games a bit longer than maybe other people while still not being too weak in the early game. So let's get into it by taking a look at the Recon Tab. The Recon Tab is very cheap in the 26 Panzer. These are all 1-cost slots, and then it's got these 2 costs, so you can run a lot of Recon. And in fact, I'm using the Recon to essentially bolster my armored forces throughout. This is why we have so many tanks in here, is that we're essentially able to, for one activation point, get another 4 tanks in a slot, or have a special heavy armor to bring in emergencies. It has a lot of flexibility, and I really do find it quite useful. So to start off, we have the Panzer 3M. These are relatively basic tanks, low in cost. They have limited range of 1,500 meters, not the strongest, so mostly good at killing enemy light vehicles like other recon units or light tanks or transports. They can deal with enemy mediums, but they have to close a distance, and they don't have the best armors, so more of a support tank, but for the price, they're very respectable. We have a single Panther D available in Phase A. This is specifically useful because in Phase A, it's our only access to a heavy tank. And because of how 1v1 ends up working, you don't need a lot of heavy armor. So just having this one of Panther is really nice in case we need to have some dominating presence in, say, an open field or something like that. For one activation point, it's not bad. And overall, it's just very solid. Good penetration, strong frontal armor, weak on the side, so you got to be careful with it, but very respectable overall. In Phase B, we bring about the Spotrup. These guys are nice because obviously they're recon infantry, so they're effective at, essentially sitting on like the edge of a forest and spotting for us. But they also do have an MG34 and G43s, and they come with some veterancy. So this makes them a little more durable than something like the Aufklärer. And I'm going to butcher many of these German names. Let me apologize for that. But these guys are, although more numerous, much weaker. And if they get essentially if they get shot at, they're going to die. The Spotrup don't. And they also can contribute a little bit to a defense in case of emergencies due to this machine gun. The only difference is really 5 points, which is not that big of a deal, especially considering that you get the same amount in Phase B. Then in the final slot, we have 4 Panzer 4Js at Veterancy 1. In many ways, this is just a standard Panzer IV, and we essentially just bring 4 extra Panzer IVs in Phase B. At Veterancy, Panzer IVs are very good because that high rate of fire and good accuracy means that they can reliably engage enemy armor and overall deal with enemy medium tanks mainly in a very effective manner, especially if you can have a leader nearby to get them to Veterancy 2 or Veterancy 3 even. If you can stack it with, say, a commander or something similar to that. +3 rate of fire is quite powerful. Moving on, we move on to the Infantry Tab, which is actually a pretty decent Infantry Tab. Decent numbers and a capable assortment of units. To start off with, we have a card of Ersatztruppen. These guys are essentially just cheap meat shields. They don't have any machine guns or anything to give them an advantage in close range, so their bigger benefit is that for 15 points, you also get 18 of them. They do have disheartened, so they will fall back quite easily unless there's nearby officers, but their big benefit is just that they help stiffen the line for very cheap. We also have a card of Pioneer Fuhrers. Specifically, we are taking the Pioneer Fuhrers because they are not only a tiny bit cheaper, but they have this HE grenade. And although we don't want these guys often fighting on the front line, in emergencies, them being able to potentially wipe an enemy squad can mean the difference between winning control of a crucial forest or losing that and maybe losing a key spot on the map. You could also go with the Panzergrenführer, who is, for 5 more points, essentially swapping the explosives for smoke grenades. But really, I think it's just a personal preference. I like having essentially some emergency pioneers to back up my actual pioneers in case something really bad happens or a fight goes particularly wrong. Speaking of which, we have a card of pioneers. These are very basic but very solid units. They got a machine gun so they can offer some suppression, but their main purpose is this explosive. If they get within 100 meters, this thing will pretty much instantly delete whatever squad it gets thrown at, and that makes them very, very powerful at close range, a very important tool for pretty much every German deck. Then the final card in Phase A is a card of vetted Panzer Grenadiers with Panzerfausts. We only have 6 of these, so not a whole lot, but I think it's overall worth it to have at least a couple of these due to that AT ability. It also has helped that they have 2 MG42s, which allows them to have high suppression. With Veterancy, they're a bit harder to suppress, which is useful alongside the Panzerfaust, so they can more reliably get this off. But it also makes them a bit better at engaging with enemy units, such as other teams with machine guns. Moving on to Phase B, we bring in a lot of additional close-range units, namely the unique card of Stoßtrupp with Berettas. These guys are very powerful. The Beretta's a pretty potent SMG, and they also have Molotov cocktails, which are useful against not only vehicles, but also infantry. We get a whopping 12 of them, and they also come at Vet 1 at least, and that makes them overall a very good bolster to our close range. They also are brought in half tracks in order to make it so they do not get sniped on their way to whatever important area. You could bring them in Opel Blitz for only 20 points if you wanted to, but they will be weak to small arms fire, which I think is too big of a risk for a unit that is so small and can only engage in close range. It's important they're able to close the distance. Then we have another card of Pioneers. This one is vetted up. This is to help them have that slightly better immunity to suppression, which makes it allows them to better get off their HE grenades. Alongside small stat buffs, these guys also are coming in half tracks in order to not get shot up before they can get to, say, that crucial forest and unload where you need them. Then we also have another card of Panzer Grenadiers with Panzerfausts, also still at vetted. Pretty much the same thing as before. Their big benefit is that they are still able to engage enemy armor, and the veterancy helps us to have a better decisive advantage. Then in Phase C, we bring a card of Panzer Grenadiers, this time's armed with MG34s because we don't have any more Panzerfaust troop. These guys do not come in vetted, so we have that massive 27 of them. We lose a total of 9 of them if we bring them with veterancy, and I do not think that's worth it. They also come in half tracks. This is to help them, again, not get shot up in the late game in case we need to push them in an aggressive manner. Otherwise, that's my Infantry Tab. You could bring some Strum Pioneers if you wanted to. If you feel like you maybe needed more Phase A close combat, you could bring like Strum Pioneers, or you could move the Stoßtruppen into Phase A. This would be a more aggressive one, and is when you're going onto a map that I would think is very close range oriented, this would be the right setup. But I like them in Phase B, so you have a good number of these close range troops throughout the entire match. Armor. Or actually, before we get onto armor, I want to point out that we have 91 infantry, which is a pretty respectable number, although definitely not as high as other units, as some other divisions. For most Panzer divisions, it's a pretty standard number, but notably, much of our infantry comes vetted, at least at Vet 1. So that is very useful in order to, meaning that if we get them to Vet 2, they can actually be pretty powerful, and hopefully, make up for maybe our slightly smaller roster than, say, an infantry division. Now moving on to armor. This is where I think you can get pretty creative with the division, as there is quite a lot to consider here. But I start off with a card of Panzer III's, very similar to the Panzer III's talked about previously, best at engaging light vehicles and transports and infantry units. We bring them in at Veterancy 1, which gives them an advantage due to them having a slightly higher rate of fire, alongside even more accuracy. We still get a total of 6 of them, and they are cheaper than the Recon variants. Very good support tank. Then we bring in our main medium tank for Phase A, which is the card of Panzer IV's. These guys also come at Veterancy 1, and as I talked about previously, Panzer IVs, when you get them with some veterancy, if you put them next to a leader or something similar, these guys can become extremely powerful with a very high rate of fire. 10 rounds per minute is very good, and good accuracy, very effective tanks. Phase B, we get one of the unique units, the Stug M43 75. It has relatively low armor, but it does have, for very cheap, a decent gun. At 40 points, they are just as cheap as the Panzer IIIL, but we get more of them, and they notably have a much higher rate of fire. At Vet 1, they are coming with 14 rounds per minute compared to even something like the Panzer III, which has a total of 8 rounds per minute at Veterancy. So that's one of their big benefits. They also have more range than the Panzer III's, having 1750 meters, which is actually pretty similar to most medium tanks. So there is a benefit there. 85 millimeters of penetration is just enough to be able to threaten a decent amount of medium tanks. I definitely would not use these guys to try to brawl 1v1, but if you can potentially get 2 of them out at once, and that could 2v1 against like T-34s or something similar. Also good at maybe backing up like your Panzer IVs or something similar. They have a limited amount of HE rounds, which could also be useful for having them support infantry a little bit. But I like to use them similar to Panzer III's, dealing with lighter enemy armor, or supporting my medium tanks, the Panzer IVs. Speaking of which, we bring in a second card of the Panzer IVH's, also at Veterancy. Same thing, this is just going to be our main line. We do bring in essentially 11 of these, though, because we managed to get that 4 out of the Recon Tab, which is a very nice bonus on top of the 7 we'd normally get there. It helps us take these a bit more into the late game. And then in Phase C, we bring in our Panthers. Panthers, as I talked about previously, are expensive, but very powerful in head-on engagements. The extra penetration on their gun and thick frontal armor makes them very durable, and excellent at brawling with even enemy heavy tanks outside of stuff like the IS-2. We bring them in with Veterancy 1 because we're not expecting to really be fielding a lot of them. You could bring them in unvetted, and at that rate they come in with a total of 8. But, to be honest, with 4 Panther A's alongside the single Panther D, that's 5 Panthers already. That is quite a lot of them. And in 1v1, you don't really have the ability to afford many more than that, especially because we have some other things that are able to carry our armor in the late game, which we will get to in a little bit. So bringing them in with a bit of veterancy makes it so they are having a higher rate of fire and better accuracy, and once we get them to Vet 2 or Vet 3, we can very easily get some powerful units and just overall have a more dominating presence on open areas. Moving on, we get to the the support tab. Starting out, we have the Flammenwerfers. These guys are just very useful utility cards. They bring in flamethrowers, obviously, but they also have smoke grenades, and they most notably are very cheap and come in a very fast transport, which allows us to quickly get them onto the front line, which at the start of the match can be very important to maintaining control over certain flags. We also bring in one of the unique vehicles, the Flame Panzer 3M. This is a flamethrower tank, and with the Tribute to Italy DLC, these guys got buffed to have a much higher, not a more effective rate of fire, and also just overall be more effective. At only 30 points, they're not that expensive, and they do have 160 meters range. So this allows them to potentially engage enemy infantry without being damaged itself. I do think there is a very strong argument that these are just simply not good enough. I find them fun, but definitely I think that if you're trying to absolutely optimize, it would be better just to go with something like the 4F1 or even just grills for infantry support. These are only really effective in certain circumstances, namely close range, and although they do have decent armor, they will absolutely get murdered if anything with decent anti-tank capability shows up. But a fun unit. We also have a card of, apologies, this should be MG42s. The MG42 is a very capable machine gun. Long range at 1250 meters, very good at harassing unarmored targets. Has a very high suppression rate. Overall, just very effective at supporting our infantry. We then move on to having our commander, which is in an SDKFZ. Essentially, this is just the cheapest commander. You could bring in the Panzer IV or a Panther as your commander, but I don't think you want to ever have your commander fighting, so we just go with the cheapest one. Phase B, we bring out a card of Opel Blitz. Very useful because they allow us to repair tanks and also resupply our various units. Pretty much a must-have in any division. Then we get another unique unit, the Stug M43 105. This is a very interesting vehicle. They are 50 points, so they still aren't that expensive, and they do have 75 millimeters of armor, the same as a Panzer IV. They also have a 2,000 meter range on their HE rounds. And that is one of the interesting things, is that they're very good at very far ranges at harassing enemy infantry and whatnot. And as such, I think they are interesting to use. Their heat shells has 100 meters of penetration, but only has that 1,500 meter range. And I think overall, although an interesting unit, I do think that they are definitely replaceable in this slot. Again, the Panzer IV F1 could be a similar thing, or even Grill, both of which are very close competition-wise. Notably, they do have a small amount of availability, but that heat round can be quite effective at, potentially sniping an enemy armored unit that gets too close. The biggest downside of them, I think, is the extremely low rate of fire of 3 rounds per minute. Just for reference, that is extremely slow. A Panzer IV has a 7 round per minute rate of fire, so this is about half of that. So I definitely think there is some weaknesses to this, and I think that you could honestly replace it with a card of grills and maybe find that more effective. But the armor and ability to engage enemy tanks at 1500 meters could be quite useful. They're in here to be tested around with. Then we move on to the anti-tank tab. Oops, there we go. So we start off with the Panzer Vernichtons. Again, butchering the German words, I'm sorry. But these are essentially Panzerschreck teams. Compared to the standard Panzerschreck, we lose 1 squad of them, but we are able to bring these guys in as a 6-man team and at Veterancy 1. I like these a lot more than the standard Panzerschrecks, namely because for only about 10 more points, they have a lot of G43s, which makes them a little more effective in infantry combat, but also they are better immune to suppression, and they also are more durable. And I think that just makes them much more consistent in effectively utilizing the Panzerschreck. The 2-man teams, although a little bit cheaper and more numerous, I just think that they tend to get killed without much. If you make a mistake with them, you're punished a lot more, although maybe that's just me being bad. But I definitely like these guys more and prefer them over just 4 Panzerschreck teams. We also have a card of Martyr 3Ms. The Martyr 3M is a measly 50 points, quite cheap. We get 4 of them, and they have a long-range 75mm gun. They're essentially like glass cannon versions of the Panzer IV, having essentially the same gun. They also have APCR, so if they get a little bit closer, they can engage even heavier targets. But their big benefit is just the cheapness of them and the fact that they can actually kill enemy mediums. That is quite powerful. But measly armor means that they are going to die if they get caught out or shot at too much. Phase B, we bring in a card of Pak 40s. Pak 40 is a very standard unit. Pretty much every German division is playing a card of Pak 40s in Phase B. We bring them unvetted. They're just really good, to put it simply. Same gun as the Martyr 3 or as the Panzer 4. Just a very good tank at defending a position. And then we have in Phase C the card of Jagdpanzers 4s. These guys are pretty potent, in many ways being a stronger Panzer IV. They are more expensive, but they have the same gun alongside having 130mm of frontal armor, the same as the Panther. And this makes them very good at brawling with enemy armor in a very consistent manner. They're very good at killing enemy medium tanks, and because we're bringing them in Phase C, these make up the large majority of our late-game armor. Them being about 50 points cheaper than the Panthers is why we bring these guys vetted, because we're able to get these as we needed when we need the absolute kick, the extra kick of their high-caliber gun. But otherwise, we can just use Jagdpanzers to be better than our Panzer IVs, so they're very good in between. I think it is entirely reasonable to bring them in Phase B, because I could definitely see sometimes the Panzer IVs might need a little bit of extra, a more heavily armored unit. but I like them in Phase C, at least at the moment, because 9 of them combined with our 4 Panthers gives us a very large and well-rounded armored formation. Of particular note, I want to point out one thing. The Stug M43-90, a unique one-of vehicle, although good, is not that much better than the Martyr 3. It does have 170 millimeters of penetration at 2,000 meters, which is very nice. However, compared to the Martyr, it already has, at 1750, 145 millimeters of penetration, and we get 4 of them, 3 more. And I think just activation point wise, the Aaa Tab is just too expensive to really make this work. If there was maybe 2 of them, or even if I think there was 2 of them, I honestly think it would be a good inclusion. But because you only have a single copy, I just don't think it's worth it. Especially because if you need a high penetration vehicle, the Panther A only costs a single activation point and is also much more heavily armored, alongside being a recon unit. So, although a cool vehicle, I don't think it's worth the inclusion outside of for fun. Our Aaa Tab is relatively straightforward but has a unique and powerful unit. But starting off, we bring in a card of Gepards in Phase A. These guys come with veterancy, which is very useful for the 20mm flak. They also come armored, so they're not going to die to small arms, unlike, say, the standard flak. You get the same availability, and in fact, compared to the other motorized self-propelled variants, you actually get more of them when you bring them in vetted. And I think overall the Gepard is just the most effective vehicle. You could save 5 points, but I think you'd have to bring them unvetted, and I think the veterancy is definitely worth 5 points, alongside the fact that this is the only armored 20mm. Then we move on to a unique unit, the Famo 88. The big benefit is that this is essentially just a flak 41 88mm slapped on a half track. And that's actually very, very powerful. First things first, it's self-propelled, so it's able to quickly get out of dangerous situations, something the regular flak can struggle to do. It also has armor, so it's not going to die to small arms fire. Another problem that the Flak 41 had, where if a squad managed to sneak close to it, they would essentially just guarantee the kill on it. The Famo does not allow that. And both of those already are strong are very strong positives on an already strong unit, because the 88mm is just really good. It's got a 2,000 meter range AP round. It's got long range HE shells alongside the 3,000 meter AA ability. It's just overall a very effective dual purpose gun, and because it's self-propelled, it has few weaknesses to it. I think a very, very strong vehicle overall. The only big downside is the cost of it at 120, but that is similar to something like the SDKFZ 7-1. But we essentially just bring 6 copies, 2 in Phase A, 4 in Phase B. Then we move on to artillery. Oops, this should actually be like this. Okay, so artillery is pretty basic. The 26 Panzer has a good amount of artillery, and you could build this, I think, in a couple different ways. But I went with one of, I think, the safest options. Essentially, we have the 81mm in the half tracks. Notably, we have the slightly more expensive one because it carries much more ammunition, so it's more self-sufficient. And we get 2 of those in Phase A to support our units. We bring in battery Fuhrers, essentially just 4 more leaders to make use of alongside our Pioneer Fuhrers, useful at bolstering and vetting up our various units. And then we also bring in 2 Wolframen 40s, powerful rocket artillery. They will annihilate anything that gets caught in the blast radius, and that's a very powerful effect. We get 2 of them in Phase B, which I think is very useful. I do think that there are some other options. If you're looking for counter battery options, the SK-18 is something to look at. It's got a very strong counter barrage ability. Due to its higher rate of fire, it's very good at just countering enemy artillery. But there is also, for example, something like the Hummel, which is a 150 millimeter gun on a self-propelled chassis. It's armored, so it has the benefits of being self-propelled, of armored, and it can move quickly. And it's just a 105 millimeter gun for some late game punch. They are options. The biggest downside is I don't think you can fit really more than 3 artillery in this roster because it just gets so expensive at 4 and 5 activation points. And then moving on to our final tab, our air tab is a little basic, but essentially we have cards of Focke-Wulf 190s F8s. Their medium resilience is nice, and these bombers carry a decent payload. Not the strongest, but not the worst either. And then we bring in a card of high veterancy RE 2005s. Armed with 3 autocannons, they're pretty good at killing enemy airplanes. They have a relatively good speed alongside. Then moving on to our air tab, it's a little limited but has a decent amount. We bring in the Focke-Wulf 190s F8s. These guys are medium resilience fighter bombers, mainly useful because they have a decent payload, not the strongest, but good enough. We bring in 2 in Phase A alongside 4 in Phase B, and then we also in Phase B bring in 4 of the Italian RE 2005s, namely at Veterancy 2, to bring their maneuverability up to excellent, alongside boosting the accuracy of their guns. 3 autocannons makes them quite good at engaging enemy planes and killing them, which is very good for them. Also quite good speed-wise. 600 kilometers is pretty fast. The only weakness is that they have low resilience, so you got to be careful with them, especially if sending them on long missions that could bring them in range of enemy AA. But overall, really nice. There are other options here. For example, you could potentially bring in some Ju-87D5s with their heavier payloads, but their poor resilience and very slow speed, I think, makes them difficult to use if the enemy has any fighters of their own. You could also bring in some Bf-109 G6 R4s. These guys are very similar to the RE 2005, having 3 autocannons, but these have 30 millimeter autocannons, and this makes them actually extremely lethal against enemy aircraft. We can't really vet them up in the same way, so they have worse maneuverability, but I think there is potentially an argument that you could bring, say, 2 of these in Phase A to have a strong way to shoot down enemy bombers. And then the other thing is that there is a unique unit, this 1007 bomber. You have 2 options, one with a lot of small time bombs and one with a really big 800 kilogram bomb. They're very resilient, so they could be a good way. You get a decent amount of them in Phase B and C, so you could bring these in maybe in the mid to late game. But overall, I've stuck with a smaller, small and lean Air Force, just enough to get the job done, especially because these only costed 1 activation point each, which allowed me to invest elsewhere. And otherwise, that is all I have for today. I think I really enjoy this division. I think the unique things it brings, like the Stoßtruppen and the Italian vehicles and flame tanks, are all really cool and gives this division a very unique standpoint. It can work on its own and works differently than other Panzer divisions, and I really like that. I also think there's just a lot of ways to potentially build this. I do think, for example, you could very much lean into a stronger air tab, bringing in like the bigger bombers, or you could potentially have extra AT and bring in like a lot of Pak 40s. but I overall just like it. I feel like it's a very well balanced division, no matter how you build it. And honestly, I think that it'll probably end up, at least seeming what better players have said, it does seem like actually a very strong division. So overall, really cool. I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, if you do, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below that you enjoyed this and would like to see more. Because I absolutely I make this, a somewhat frequent video upload. Or just let me know down in the comments if you play Steel Division 2 yourself. I'm interested in if you guys are, if you have played this game and if you enjoy it yourself. But otherwise, that is going to be it. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good day.